I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this country, the Gadigal people, the Eora Nations, and to all First Nations people here. Thank you. It's really beautiful to have time here with you all this afternoon, and I mean, how can I follow on from Bo Champion? Like, seriously, that was just awesome. You know, when we see young, inspiring men and women like Bo coming through that just give us so much hope. I wanted to talk about strength in solidarity. It's absolutely critical that whatever we do as First Nations people in this country, we have to navigate a way through a system that was never our system, a system that is a very real system in this country today. In Strength and Solidarity, we do that in representing our own people, our own families, our own clans. In the Northern Territory, we have over 100 Aboriginal language groups, and I am of the Yanyuan people of the Gulf of Carpentaria and the Gurangi and Marda people who are our clansmen. I want to also acknowledge two women here who have been very much a part of my life growing up, two women of the Wiradjuri, Auntie Anne and Auntie Bev, and their families, who have helped guide me throughout my journey in life. For the Yanyuwa, we are known as Lianta Widiara, which means our spiritual origin comes from the sea country. So everything we do has to come back to our sense of self and who we are and how we relate to one another. There is another name that I want to share with you, and that is a name called Gujiga. Gujiga is our songline. The Yanyuwa call it Gujiga. The people in Uluru, the Anungu, they might call it Yugurba. There are different names, and you will have your name for your songline and your story of your journey and your families. My Gujiga has taken me right across from Yanyuwa country through the countries of First Nations people across the territory, and then down to Canberra, to the traditional owners of that country. And everywhere I go, I'm incredibly grateful for the gift of knowing that Australia has a black history, has a black present, and most definitely has a black future. In my time in the Northern Territory Parliament, I worked as a minister, and I was involved with a number of portfolios, and I understand that there are many portfolios or agencies represented here with your membership. Indigenous Affairs was a critical one, and is still a critical one. Families, child protection, women, and local government and tourism were the agencies that I was responsible for in my time in the Northern Territory Parliament. One of the things that I have always firmly believed in and continue to believe in now as Senator for the Northern Territory is the importance of First Nations people navigating our way through this system that is not our system, but is a system that we need to learn to navigate through. And we have to do it together in order to give hope for the next generation of First Nations people, but all Australians, to be proud and to know that this country and its history belongs to all of us. There is too much, as you would all know within your own communities and families, there is too much sadness and grief that goes on. Too much sadness and grief as a result of our young people and older people taking their lives way too soon. Too much grief because of sickness that we should not be experiencing in this country at all. Sickness that takes people at an early age, whether it's to do with renal and kidney disease, whether it's to do with heart failure, cardiovascular disease. It's not right. When I walk into the renal centres around the Northern Territory, And I have this image constantly of these beds lined up along the wall with white sheets and men and women of our First Nations countrymen lying in those beds with a machine that just dialyses and goes around and around. And the biggest excitement that people can get when they look at funding is we've got another chair in the community, another chair to look after someone who is suffering from kidney disease. And I say, no, we're losing sight of something here. We can't get excited about that. We should not even be having these chairs. And what are we doing about it? In the federal caucus, we've established what's called the First Nations Labor Caucus with Linda Burney and Senator Pat Dodson and I, plus 20 other federal Labor members in the caucus, trying to influence policy change to better understand the cultural needs of our families across the country is what our federal Labor First Nations caucus is about. How do we influence change in a way that touches at the very core of the reasons that impact our families? How do we influence in the House of Representatives and in the Senate the legislation that then goes out to supposedly make lives better for all people? But we scrutinise and say, well, how does this make it better for First Nations people? In the Northern Territory, there was a community, and I wanted to share a couple of stories with you, that was doing really well with education, and their kids were going to school. The school itself, in terms of infrastructure and resourcing, was receiving the adequate funding that it should, to have the number of teachers that it needed, to have the number of teachers' assistants, to give the special needs program also that assistance. And then one day, the kids of the community wanted to go for a swim. There'd been a lot of rain lately, and there'd been just different water holes that had set up nearby the community. And so they were swimming, having a good time. And then one of the kids disappeared. And everyone got out screaming, crocodile, crocodile, crocodile got him. Crocodile, quick, you mob, get out, get out. Everybody jumped out. The whole community went looking for this young man. He was about 13, 14 years of age. They hunted along there, looking for him, trying to look for tracks, seeing if they could find what happened to him. Was it a crocodile, or did he just get pulled under? Where's his body? And the community was devastated, torn apart by the fact that they couldn't find this young fellow. And so they grieved and grieved. And as time went on, the suspicion started. The questions, the doubts. You sure it was a crocodile? Nah, must have been somebody been grabbing him. Someone must have pulled him under and took him somewhere. So there started to be a split with the different clans. Oh yeah, that clan over there must have done it. Look, they never liked us. I reckon it was a crocodile. This went on for months and months, to the point where those clan groups wouldn't send their kids to school. Not because they didn't believe in an education, but because they didn't trust each other. I sat back in the cabinet rooms in the Northern Territory Parliament and looked at the figures, and the government wanted to change the teaching numbers. It wanted to change the resourcing allocation. It didn't have the attendance figures that it needed. And I said, wait, hang on a minute. Do you mob know what's happened out there? I said, those kids are out there. Do you know what's happened in that community? Do you understand that what is going on there is far deeper than the statistics of your figures on that paper? Where is the healing for that community? Where is the social effort that goes into counselling for that community? Where is the money that's gone into the translation that's required to assist people through the grieving process? What have the police done to justify the kind of search, the ranges? You have to change your mindset. I said, that community wants to go and have an education, but they're experiencing something really traumatic. When I went back there to talk to them, there was this really wonderful woman who guided me there through all of this as I tried to help them. Her name is Elizabeth, and she was a teacher at the school and still is an assistant teacher. And I saw her, and she was just digging away in this big garden. And I said, Elizabeth, you're not at school? She said, no, my girl, I have to be here, look, in this garden. And I said, well, that's a really big garden. What are you going to do in that by yourself? And she said, no, you watch. I said, okay. And then slowly, one by one, over the next months, the clan groups would come into the garden. They wouldn't talk to each other because they still didn't trust each other. They were hurting, angry, suspicious. But each of the clan groups would pick a section of the garden that was their garden, and they would start planting. They'd plant vegetables, fruit trees, all kinds of bush plants, and each day they would come in there. They didn't talk to each other, but they spent time in each other's presence. I said to Elizabeth, what can I do to help you? And this was on another trip of mine out, and I had to fly up there. I couldn't get there any other way. And she said, can you bring some chicks? Oh, okay. You want some hot chooks? I can get that from Coles and bring it out. No, Malarndirri. No. We need little chickens so they can run around in this garden. I thought, oh my God, how am I going to bring chicks out on the plane? Okay, I'll go. I said, oh, Elizabeth, I'll give it my best shot. And so I went and got these chicks. There was about 10 of them, put them in a box, tried to just look normal, walking with a box of little chicks. And I got on the plane, and I think the pilots and others might have looked the other way, thank goodness. And I landed there and gave her the box of chicks, and I said, they're here, safe and sound. And the families came, and they all took a couple of little chicks, and they took it to their section of the garden. Then the mother of that young fellow who got taken, she took me by the hand and she said, Malarndirri, just come with me first. I want to show you something. And I went with her back to her house, and she lived there near the river. So her place was right next to it, and it was not far from probably where her son had gone. And she said, sit with me here first. So I sat, she said, you watch. We sat and we looked and waited. A water guana came out. We were sitting there watching, and he walked up through to the front of the house and into the room of her son's room, and just went to sleep on his bed. And she took me then, she said, come and have a look. And I went in the room and had a look. And he was just asleep there. And we walked back outside, and she said, that's my son's totem. That's my son. I know he's at peace wherever he is, and whatever happened, it's okay. And then all those kids in that community started going back to school, one by one. They all went back. And those kids did really well. And thankfully, the funding wasn't pulled from that school. Thankfully, the teachers weren't pulled from that school, and the resources. It's so important that as First Nations people, we can navigate others, wider Australia, through the importance and significance of our cultural beliefs, of our stories, of our families, and explain. And even if they don't listen, we don't give up. We keep going because we know those stories are real. We know that the next generation of children, both black and white, need to respect the depth and the history of our stories. Even those who were taken away, and even those First Nations people still finding their way today, finding their sense of self and identity, that's your Gujiga. Don't be ashamed of that. That is your story. No one can take that from you unless you give it to them. So I say to you that in whatever field you're working in, whoever you sit beside, you must stay strong. Strength in solidarity is critical, not just as First Nations people, but in believing the greater good for all Australians. That where you work and what you do matters. It should matter to you, because when it does, it matters to everyone else. I know this is your first conference, and it is an absolute honour to be able to be here with you this afternoon. And I leave this message with you, that strength in solidarity, that we all make mistakes, even where I am in the First Nations Labor Caucus, trying to talk with First Nations members across the country, urging them to keep going. I do the same with you. Stay strong, and thank you for your time this afternoon. Bawiyabara.